In this video, I'm going to cover exposure considerations and controls. I'm going to cover light meter use, the Sunny 16 rule, and exposure bracketing. So let's go to Paris, France, and visit the Louvre for a detailed explanation of this case study with exposure considerations. I stood about right here. Actually, let me just show you a bit of drone footage to give you an overarching context. See the Eiffel Tower in the background? So this giant thing is the Louvre Museum, and this is the back and side parts of it. The pyramid that's at the front of the museum, like this is the front wall of the museum, and this is the front courtyard, and I'm standing right here. This scene is one of the pyramids at the front of the Louvre Museum, which is the world's largest art museum in the center of Paris, France. This is a sunny summer day around 10 a.m., and it's a perfect place to talk about exposure. First, I want to zoom out a bit, all the way to 24 millimeters, which is a common wide-angle focal length. You can see based on the crop of the video that I was shooting at around 85 millimeters. Now let's slow this way down and take a picture. This is perfect. So we have a very typical image based on a sunny day. This actually correlates to the Sunny 16 rule, which is how photographers used to base their exposure decisions. Essentially, the Sunny 16 rule dictates that on a bright and sunny day with clear, distinct shadows, the f-stop should be set at f16, and the shutter speed should be set to align with your ISO choice. This essentially guarantees a good exposure of your scene. So here, I chose ISO 100 because I wanted the lowest amount of noise possible in the image. The closest full stop shutter speed is 1/125th of a second, and the f-stop was left at f16, which will pretty much keep everything in focus since I'm using a wide-angle focal length. That is the position of the light meter indicator. It is positioned directly underneath the 0 mark, which indicates a normal or correct exposure. We're not going to get into the debate of subjective choice of exposure. So for now, let's just say a normal exposure is what most closely approximates the true scene as we see it. Notice how the light meter goes to the right to +3 stops, which indicates overexposure, and goes to -3 stops on the left side, which indicates underexposure. So I want to run a series of under and overexposed images in this experiment. I will keep the ISO locked at 100 and the f-stop at f16. The only variable that I'm going to change is the shutter speed. Obviously, you can over or underexpose an image with the f-stop and the ISO, but again, we're just going to change the shutter speed. By shooting at 1/250th of a second, this shot is underexposed by -1 stop. I would suggest this is actually a better exposure of the sky, but you do start to lose detail in the buildings and the people. This shot was taken at 1/500th of a second. Notice how the light meter indicates that this is -2 stops underexposed. Again, I like the exposure of the sky, but now the buildings and the people are more of a silhouette. This shot was taken at 1/1000th of a second at 3 stops underexposed from the normal exposure. Now remember, shutter speed control for both motion and movement as well as light and exposure. Here, I am using shutter speed mainly as an exposure control. This shot was taken at 1/2000th of a second and is definitely starting to look underexposed. Most light meters do not go past ±3 stops. So if your image is more than 3 stops over or under, typically most cameras will let the light meter go to the far one side or the other, and it will blink rapidly to indicate that it's severely over or underexposed. Just to prove the point, this shot was taken at 1/4000th of a second. And this shot was taken at 1/8000th of a second. Clearly, it is very underexposed. Let's go back to the correct exposure of 1/25th of a second at f16 at ISO 100, which again is a perfect Sunny 16 rule example. Now let us start overexposing this scene in full stop shutter speed increments. This is 1/60th of a second, 1 stop overexposed. Notice the buildings and the people look better, but now the sky looks a little too bright. The details are blown out. This is 1/30th of a second, 2 full stops overexposed. My camera is locked down on a tripod, so I can go lower than 1/60th of a second for these images. And since the buildings were pretty much in total shadow based on the position of the sun, this is probably the brightest image of the buildings to showcase their detail. But notice the sky is really blown out now. as are the bricks on the ground. This is the consideration of exposure when you have scenes that are drastically different from the very brightest areas of the scene to the very darkest areas of the scene. Okay, this shot was taken at 1/15th of a second, and it's just wildly overexposed. Notice the light meter is pointing at the +3 mark, which indicates 3 stops of overexposure. Just for your reference, I'm going to continue overexposing the scene a bit more. This is 1/4 of a second.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Hold the phone. What did I forget? Did you pay attention? Were you watching? Let's rewatch that.
Okay, this shot was taken at 1/15th of a second. Just for your reference, I'm going to continue overexposing the scene a bit more. This is 1/4 of a second.
Did you catch that? I skipped 1/8 of a second. Make sure you learn your shutter speed scale.
This is 1/2 of a second. And this is 1 full second at f16 at ISO 100. So I have essentially ran through the entire shutter speed scale from 1 second to 1/8000th of a second. Here they are all together. Depending on what's most important to you in this scene is ultimately going to decide which is the best exposure for you to communicate your idea. Whenever I get in a challenging exposure situation or I'm at some historic or important scene to me, I always bracket my shots. That means I take several shots at normal exposure, and then I'll take a few shots a little over, a little under, just to ensure I have the best exposure possible or have many options later when editing. If I could only take one shot of this scene, I would most likely choose the camera meter suggestion of f16 at 1/125th of a second and ISO 100. This seems to be the best balance between keeping the buildings a little bright but not overexposing the sky. Because I know in Photoshop, I can darken down the sky a little and I can still brighten up the buildings a little without having to push either area too far. Remember, whenever learning new things, I always recommend to just take what applies to you and use it, and everything else that doesn't apply, leave it behind. You will know what tips and techniques personally resonate with your style of image making. As an artist and as a photographer, you need to trust your intuition.
It is blooper time.
First, I want to zoom out a bit. 24 millimeters, which is a common wide-angle focal length. Something's not right. Okay, I got it. I don't know why I'm so, but I can't the screen in my head. Right. Now, we will get into the debate of subjective choice of exposure. Yeah, I was making it up. Again, most light meters go past stick. No, that's me. That was all me.
Hey, if you like this video and it helps, you can help me. Smack it, whack it, and crack-a-lack it. Take care. I like subscribers.
That's awesome! Whoa! Yes! Oh my god, I did! This is
Hey, you stayed to the end. You know what that means? You're awesome. I'm talking about you. Now get out of here.